When a wrestler leaves WWE, there are usually many different ways for them to continue to earn a living in the wrestling industry, whether it's signing for another company, doing the convention and autograph signing thing, starting a podcast, or, well, lots of things. Some former WWE stars, on the other hand, decide that the business simply isn't for them and just about disappear from it altogether. Just why do some choose to hang up their boots, and what becomes of them once they leave the spotlight? I'm Adam Pacitti from Cultaholic Wrestling, and these are 10 WWE stars who completely disappeared from the business. Join us. Number 10, Nathan Jones. Nathan Jones had so much going for him. He had the size, the look, a killer gimmick based on his real-life checkered past, and it's really no surprise that WWE gave him a big opportunity, despite the fact that he wasn't exactly Dean Malenko when it came to the actual wrestling bit itself. The Colossus of Boggo Road was initially brought in as the protege of The Undertaker, but he was taken out of a planned WrestleMania 19 tag match and sent to developmental for more training. He emerged months later as a member of SmackDown general manager Paul Heyman's Monster Squad and looked initially impressive. During a tour of Australasia, however, Jones snapped and quit the company. According to reports, he found backstage politics, constant ribbing, and merciless mind games too much to bear. Also bothered by the constant stress of traveling and worn down by physical wear and tear, Jones packed his bags and pretty much vanished from the industry. He worked one brief tour of Australia a couple of years later, but has focused on his acting career since. Number 9, Paul Burchill. An English heavyweight who moved like a cruiserweight, Paul Burchill was signed by WWE in the mid-2000s, long before the company started freely snapping up any Brit with a glimmer of potential and opened up NXT UK. Burchill, who had made his name in the UK's Frontier Wrestling Alliance promotion, initially debuted as a partner of William Regal, then morphed into a Jack Sparrow-inspired pirate before being repackaged again and paired up with on-screen sister Katie Lee. He managed to avoid a proposed sibling romance angle, but sadly he couldn't avoid injuries, stop-start pushes, or erratic brand switches. The highlight of his latter-day WWE run was his feud with the Hurricane, which culminated in a rare mask versus career match. Go figure that, just a few months after losing that match, he would be fired for real. Despite only having just turned 30 at the time, and still with heaps of talent that he never really got to show on the biggest stage, Burchill practically retired after his WWE career ended. He opted instead to go back to school, get married, have kids, and become a fireman, and has only wrestled a handful of indies since his release. Number 8, The Cat. Stacey Carter got into the business due to her relationship with then-boyfriend and future husband, Jerry He Likes 'Em Young Lawler. About a year after first surfacing in the King's Memphis territory, Carter debuted on Monday Night Raw as Miss Kitty. Before long, she was winning the women's title and also wrestling in pudding matches. She was a regular on WWE programming for much of the year 2000 and engaged in a long rivalry with Terry Runnels before getting into it with the devious right to censor who wanted to prevent her from getting them out and polluting our horny little minds. While that storyline was still ongoing, the Cat was fired for reasons that were never really made abundantly clear, and Lawler quit the company in protest. They did the indie thing together for a few months before their marriage fell apart and Carter filed for divorce. After their split, the Cat retired from wrestling and was MIA for several years until it was eventually discovered that she was working in real estate. Carter briefly returned to wrestling in 2010 after marrying the man formerly known as Kazan, though once again went back into the wilderness following their divorce. Number 7, Rico. Rico got into the wrestling game late, but made up for lost time by packing quite a lot into his eventful stint. Prior to getting into the Graps game, Rico led an eclectic life and was at various times a police officer, bail bondsman, Batman at the Six Flags amusement park, and an American gladiator, amongst other things. After learning the ropes down in OVW, Rico emerged on WWE television as the stylist cum manager of Billy and Chuck, before reinventing himself as something like the modern-day Adrian Street. He got over, winning the tag titles on 2 occasions and gaining a firm following with fans. Despite this success though, his advancing age and mounting injuries convinced WWE to cut bait in late 2004. After being released, Rico did one tour for All Japan, but was far from happy with his experience in the land of the rising sun and decided to call it a career. He went back to law enforcement work and neglected to do the indie convention and shoot interview thing that so many of his ilk do, but did come out of retirement in 2012 for a match in his native Las Vegas. Number 6, Shanique. A basketball standout at university level, Linda Miles tried out for the second season of WWE Tough Enough in 2002. She, along with Jackie Gator, were declared co-winners and started on TV soon after. Too soon, as it turned out, since both women were pulled from our screens after a matter of weeks and sent to OVW for further training. She re-emerged a year later as Shanique, the leather-clad S&M-obsessed manager of the Basham brothers. Very athletic, as well as possessing a unique look, and with time on her side, Shanique stood out as one to watch as she dominated SmackDown's Divas and led the Bald Boys to Tag Team Championship glory. Though she was doing well in front of the camera, things were rather different behind the curtain. According to reports, Miles had a tough time dealing with the grind of the road and was called out for her supposed attitude issues before being sent back to Ohio Valley Wrestling in early 2004. The reports of her time there were much the same, and she was released that November. Outside of one random match in Mexico in 2005, she never wrestled again and currently works as a college basketball referee. Number 5, Steve Blackman. An unsung hero of the Attitude Era, Steve Blackman came back from near death after contracting malaria to get signed by WWE and ultimately became the MVP of the company's hardcore division. The Lethal Weapon found his niche competing in those plunder-filled matches and had memorable bouts with the likes of Shane McMahon and Ken Shamrock, while also amusing in odd-coupled tag teams with Al Snow and Grandmaster Sexay. Wrestling's such a punishing style, and defending the title 24 hours a day, 7 days a week took its toll on Blackman, however, and he began to suffer from nagging injuries. He took time away in order to heal and did some work in WWE's developmental system, but the damage was too much, and after sitting out the best part of a year of his contract, he and WWE parted ways in October 2002. Since then, he's gone back to being a bail bondsman and opened up an MMA academy. He did pop up in a battle royal for the 15th anniversary of Raw and showed his face on the JBL and Cole YouTube show, but has otherwise stayed away from the business. Number 4, Parma Cannon. Brian Mayo was an indie worker who, while wrestling as Brian Black in the small halls and armories, caught the attention of WWE and was signed to a developmental deal in 2005. Adept at working as both a wrestler and in an authority figure role, Brian was brought to television as Parma Cannon, the meddling network representative who was on hand to make SmackDown general manager Teddy Long's life a misery. A veiled shot at UPN, Parma was responsible for the introduction of the Dicks, the Boogeyman, and the ill-fated Juniors division. WWE were building to a match between Cannon and The Miz, which would have served as Miz's in-ring debut, but Brian abruptly quit the company before it could happen. During the first day of a planned 8-day tour of Europe, he packed his bags in the middle of the night and flew himself home after allegedly being on the receiving end of some serious harassment courtesy of locker room menaces like JBL and Chris Benoit. Though Mayo wrestled a few indie shows after his WWE exit, he mainly focused on MMA and now works in marketing. Number 3, Marcus Corvon. Could somebody, anybody, please tell me how this man wasn't a major star? An NFL standout who played in a Super Bowl, Monty Brown decided to try his hand at wrestling once his football days were done due to injury. He gained experience on the indies and had a brief spell in very early day TNA. Though that didn't immediately lead to a sustained run, Brown came back over a year later as the alpha male and quickly climbed the ladder. Possessing an incredible physique, tons of charisma, and one of the best finishes in the business, Monty got over big time, but hit a ceiling and could never quite penetrate the NWA title scene. He left TNA in mid-2006 and was snapped up by WWE, debuting on the revamped ECW brand as Marcus Corvon, where he quickly aligned himself with the so-called new breed of ECW stars. 6 months after debuting, Corvon asked for time off in order to address a family issue and never returned to either WWE or the wrestling business. He now works as a personal trainer and last showed up in a video shared by AEW star Lance Archer. Number 2, Nydia. Co-winner of the first Tough Enough alongside Maven, Nydia did the requisite time in OVW before being called up to SmackDown and paired with Jamie Noble. The redneck couple were a riot on the blue brand, and Nydia demonstrated ample charisma and comedic timing in interviews, angles, and skits. She continued to work on her in-ring skills behind the scenes and worked the occasional match, usually mixed tags, before her and the redneck Messiah were split up and she was traded to Raw. In her new surroundings and without a real defined gimmick or much of a storyline to work with, Nydia floundered. It was no surprise when she was among those released during a round of cuts in November of 2004. Nydia has since stated that she was relieved when she got the call and that she hadn't been enjoying her WWE life for some time. She didn't immediately leave the business mind, doing a couple of indies as well as matches in Italy, Puerto Rico, and Mexico before quitting it for good. Number 1. Mohamed Hassan. A career as brief as it was infamous, if things had went different for Mohamed Hassan, he could have been a genuine long-term main eventer and even WWE champion. But that didn't happen, and Hassan didn't get to reach those heights due to circumstances mostly out of his control. Debuting on Raw in the back end of 2004, Hassan and his manager Daivari instantly drew an impassioned response with their button-pushing gimmick. Though he played an oppressed Middle Eastern minority, the man behind Mohamed Hassan, Mark Capani, was actually Italian-American. Hassan and Daivari had a whirlwind 7 or so months on the main roster, working with the likes of Hulk Hogan, Shawn Michaels, Steve Austin, Batista, Chris Jericho, and The Undertaker, while Capani ruffled feathers in the locker room with his naive behavior. His character was forcefully taken off of SmackDown television when a controversial angle aired on July 7th, 2005, the same day as a series of terrorist bombings in London. Hassan was then officially killed off at the Great American Bash pay-per-view. Quitting the business cold turkey, Capani went back to education and is now a high school principal. That said, he did wrestle a one-off indie match in 2018, so maybe he's not done yet.